Is this contraption the Victorian version of a VR headset? And can we make some new content for it with this 100-year-old 3D camera? Let's find out. A man's two eyes give him knowledge far beyond what he could get from one eye alone. There is good reason why nature should equip him with two eyes rather than one, though he is seldom conscious of the reason. I'm sure you all know that two eyes is what gives you depth perception, allowing you to judge how far away objects are, or see in 3 dimensions, if you will. But is it not then strange that almost all cameras only have a single lens? The limitation of a single lens was immediately noticed by the pioneers of photography in the mid-1800s. In fact, the first stereo photographs, taken with 2 lenses instead of 1, came only 2 years after the invention of practical photography itself. Though almost forgotten today, in the latter half of the 1800s, 3D photography or stereoscopic photography was massively popular. Not so much taking the photographs themselves, but instead buying mass-produced stereo view cards with professional photos. These photos could then be viewed at home in a device called a stereoscope. The stereoscope was invented in 1832 by Charles Wheatstone. It allowed 2 specially constructed drawings or illustrations to be shown to each eye separately, creating the illusion of a 3D object. Once photography became available, the drawings could be replaced by 2 photographs, taken at about an eye width apart. Over the years, the stereoscope was improved by replacing angled mirrors with 2 lenses, so the images could be printed side by side on the same card. These cards were called stereoviews. The stereoscope was also made smaller and cheaper, culminating in 1861 with the introduction of this design by Oliver Wendell Holmes. He deliberately did not patent his design, making it available to anyone who wanted to produce it. It became a widespread product and remained in production for at least 75 years. This particular model is likely from around 1900, around or a bit after the peak popularity of the stereoscope. It blocks light and distractions from the side and has a lens for each eye. Eerily similar to this modern VR headset, but I guess if the design ain't broke, don't fix it, right? There's a slot in front to insert your stereo view card, and you can adjust the distance to the image to get the best possible effect. Now, it's hard for me to convey what this 3D effect looks like on the flat screen you're watching this on. It's quite similar to what you would see at the cinema with 3D glasses, though of course here I'm just seeing a static image. I find that the longer I spend looking at an image, the more vivid the effect becomes. For the first few seconds, it can be hard to even notice the extra depth. I'll be showing you a few stereoscopic images during this video. I will first just show them side by side, but to give you a sense of depth, I will also flip between the 2 images, like so. It's also possible to see the illusion without a stereoscope by unfocusing your eyes and looking at the left image with the left eye and the right image with the right eye. But doing this without a stereoscope requires some practice to figure out. Okay, I actually want you to try this because it's a cool effect and it's a fun skill to have. And if you don't care, just skip ahead a bit to get back to the video. If you're watching on a phone, you want to keep it at about this distance, about half an arm's length, away from your eyes. If you're watching on a computer, you might want to step back a bit, or you can resize the window to make it smaller. You want to focus your eyes further away than the screen really is. To help with this, you can look just above the screen at an object further away. Then you want to carefully look back at the screen, but keep your eyes focused further away. What you're trying to end up with is 3 images side by side, where only the center one is sharp and in 3D. Another tip is to focus on a particular object in the scene and get that object to line up. In this one, you can look at the person standing at the front. And when you're trying to focus, you want the 2 versions of that person to merge into one in the center of the frame. Once you've locked in your focus, you should be able to look around in the image without losing your 3D effect. Don't worry too much if you can't do it. These are muscles we're not trained to actively control, so it's really hard to work against your reflexes. And I promise you'll still be able to enjoy the rest of the video. This might just seem like a mildly interesting optical illusion to you, but in the late 1800s, this was peak home entertainment. By the end of the century, the American company Underwood and Underwood was selling 10 million of these StereoView cards every year. I've even heard the claim that at its peak, stereoscopic photography was more popular than quote-unquote normal photography. To understand this, you have to think about what media looked like in the Victorian world. Motion picture film had not yet been invented. The first radio broadcasts were still decades away. Even just playing recorded music in your home was not widely available until the 1900s. In addition to the limited available media in the home, travel was slow and expensive. So experiencing other countries and cultures was reserved for the few. But a stereoscope could give you a detailed view of pretty much anywhere in the world. And in my opinion, much more than a simple photograph, it can give you a feeling of being there. Not only because of the three-dimensional effect, but also because the act of putting a stereoscope to your eyes blocks out the world around you. Famous or exotic locations were a popular format of StereoView cards. They often came in packs with accompanying text about the places they showed. So why did the popularity of the stereoscope drop off into the 1900s? Personally, I think other forms of visual entertainment eclipsed it. Kodak introduced cameras that lay people could use to take more personal photos, which may have been more interesting to show your visitors than something mass-produced. And for some reason, personal stereoscopic photography has never really taken off. Perhaps because of the added complexity, but possibly also because stereo images cannot be projected. And projected slideshows became a popular form of entertainment in the home.
It's the new Kodak 300 color slide projector. Not only is it the smartest looking projector you can buy, but the Kodak 300 is a pleasure to use, with easy to reach controls right here on top.
Stereoscopic photography did have a bit of a resurgence in the later half of the 20th century, particularly with the Kodak Viewmaster, which depending on your age you may remember.
See Masters of the Universe in a Viewmaster viewer. When you see them all together in 3D, the characters look so real, you think you could reach in and touch them. With Viewmaster, you can collect lots of program reels on cards and in gift sets, like Smurf and Shirt Tails, each sold separately. Viewmaster gift set with 3D viewer and a Masters of the Universe adventure on 3 reels.
Kodak also made a consumer camera for the Viewmaster in the 1950s. If there is interest, I might look more into the Viewmaster system in a future video. Still to this day, there are enthusiasts keeping stereoscopic photography alive. Most notably, perhaps, Brian May, who in addition to being an astrophysicist and the lead guitarist of Queen, is an avid stereo photographer. He has also revived the London Stereoscopic Company, which sells books of stereo images, as well as a very simple stereoscope called the Owl Viewer. And of course, with the advent of VR headsets, stereoscopic content has found a new home. I won't go too much into that technology here, but if you have access to a VR headset, I've uploaded a companion video linked in the description, which will let you see the photos from this video in all their stereoscopic glory. Let's get back to my camera. The French company Gaumont launched their stereoscopic camera, the Stereospido, in the year 1900. They produced this camera for about 30 years, and I've got my hands on one of the later models, from I believe around 1925. It has some really clever features we'll look into. One of them is the film plate magazine, which kind of blew my mind. I'll pose you a design puzzle, which I struggle to understand before I actually hand my hands on this thing. The magazine holds a stack of 8 photographic glass plates. These plates work the same way as film. When you take a photo, you expose the image onto the plate at the top of the stack. But then you're faced with a problem. You need to somehow move the top plate out of the way so that you can expose the next plate in the stack. Crucially though, you cannot expose these plates to any light when doing this. So, can you think of a mechanism that will move this top plate to the bottom of the stack without removing it from the magazine? Before I give you the solution, let's take a closer look at the rest of the camera. This is an all-metal version of the Stereospido, which cost 3,275 francs in this catalog I found from 1929. Currency conversions this far back aren't necessarily that accurate, but from what I can tell it's around 1,800 euros in today's money. They also made a wooden version of the camera covered in leather, which I imagine wouldn't hold up as well as this one did over the course of 100 years. The machining and tolerances of this camera has really impressed me. Pretty much everything moves smoothly without feeling loose. Given the age, someone has definitely taken good care of this camera before it came into my possession. The most striking thing compared to a typical camera is the defining feature of stereoscopic photography, the two lenses. They are a pair of 84mm Tessar size f6.3 lenses. They are connected by two metal bars. The top bar is connected to the helical focusing mechanism of both the lenses, and the bottom one is connected to the aperture control. It's of course important that settings on the two lenses move in sync, so that you get the same focus and exposure in the left and right image. The focusing bar features a depth of field scale, which tells you how many meters away you're focusing and how deep that focus is depending on your current aperture. Because I don't have a ground glass focusing screen for this camera, the scale is actually the only tool I have to judge focus. This does work reasonably well, but you do have to estimate the distance to your subject, or even measure it if it's quite close to the camera. Unfortunately, there is a broken part on the focusing bar, which means that it comes loose on the right side. But holding at the broken end, I'm still able to keep focus in sync between the two lenses. It doesn't look like an easy part to replace either. It would need to be custom made by someone with the ability to machine very small parts. The shutter speed control is at the bottom of the front assembly. It's a pneumatic shutter design, where the speed of the shutter is controlled by a piston pushing air through a small opening. The piston is pushed by a spring, and you can adjust the shutter speed by adjusting the tension in the spring. You can actually feel the jet of air coming out of the shutter when it's triggered at a fast shutter speed. To illustrate this, I placed a candle just in front of the opening, and triggering the shutter blows out the candle. This is the oldest camera I've ever worked with, and I'm noticing when you go this far back, things were not as standardized as they became later. First, the threads on the shutter release button are male instead of female. There are some later cameras like the Nikon F2 that have male threads, but these are a different size and pitch than this camera. Thankfully, I found this original adapter on eBay that adapts into the standard female shutter release threads. Second, the shutter speed scale is just numbered 0 through 5, and you have to consult a table from Gaumont to convert to the actual timings. This scale seems specific to this manufacturer. And third, the aperture scale confused me for quite a while. While the shutter scale is listed in the catalog, there is no reference to aperture values. The scale lists 0.4, 0.5, and then 1, 2, 4, and 8. After much Googling, I found that this is the so-called French system, where 1 corresponds to f10, 2 to f14, 4 to f20, and so on. This seems pretty obscure, but maybe I would have found it sooner if I was searching in French instead of English. A nice feature of the camera is that you can transform it into a normal single-lens camera by moving the entire front assembly. Doing this also moves the septum inside the camera. This wall normally makes sure that the left and right stereo images don't blend into each other, but it needs to be out of the way when we're only making a single image. Because the camera is so wide, the single lens mode makes a 6x13 panoramic image. By unlocking the knob in the middle of the front assembly, you can also get a little bit of front rise. This is useful in architectural photography as it helps keep vertical lines parallel. Possibly my least favorite part of the camera is the viewfinder. It consists of 2 parts that can be folded down. To use it, you line up the center of the glass window with the side at the front. It's an okay approximation, but it's hard to judge the edges of your frame with any accuracy at all. It also does not show the framing of the panoramic setting. In that case, the left and right edges are pure guesses. It does have a kinda neat leveling mechanism. There's a needle that hangs freely in the window, so that it only points at the middle mark when the camera is level. It does have a tendency to get stuck though, so you have to jiggle the camera. But of course, if you're carefully trying to get the camera level, having to jiggle it back and forth is very annoying. Okay, let's go back to the film plate magazine and give the solution to the puzzle I gave earlier. We want a way to move a plate from the top of the stack to the bottom without exposing any of the plates to light. The first trick is that this magazine is actually 3 different moving parts. First, there's the outer shell of the magazine. Second, there is the dark slide, which protects the plates from light. And third, there is a drawer inside the outer shell, which holds the plates and can also be pulled out. So the order of operations is as follows. We start with a stack of unexposed plates and the dark slide closed. When mounted to the camera, we can safely pull out the dark slide without exposing the plate to light. We then point the camera at the ground, so that the top plate falls just in front of the dark slide. We then reinsert the dark slide. Now, one of the plates is sitting between the dark slide and the camera, and we can take her picture. Then the really clever part. We pull out the drawer with the remaining plates. The plate we just exposed is held back by the camera, and once the drawer is fully out, the plate will drop to the bottom of the outer shell of the magazine. When we push the drawer back in, the exposed plate is pushed through an opening in the drawer, and a set of springs allows it to get beneath the bottom plate and push the stack upwards. Now we're back in the original situation and we're ready to expose the second plate in our stack. I just found this to be a super clever and elegant solution to a problem I didn't even know existed. And all done with just some sliding parts and some help from gravity. On the side of the magazine there's a frame counter that will increase by 1 every time you push in the drawer. Of course, a roll film holder for standard 120 film would be a lot more convenient. And by 1925, roll film would have been quite widespread. But in the extensive list of accessories in the catalog I have, I see no reference to roll film. I'm not sure if there were quality concerns compared to glass plates at this time, or maybe roll film was associated with amateur photography and the professionals just stuck to the old ways. Either way, given the frames here were around 6 centimeters tall, it would be almost a perfect fit for 120 film. I think it wouldn't be too hard to design and 3D print a roll film holder for this camera, but that'll have to be a project for the future. My ultimate goal with this project was to shoot and print some images I could view through the stereoscope. I did want to try glass plate photography, since that was what this camera was originally made for. But first I decided to cut some roll film into the correct size and use those sheets in the plate holders. I started with a roll of Ilford Ortho Plus. I chose that film because I assumed it could be handled under red safe light without fogging the film. But after reading up on it, my impression is that it will actually fog under standard red safe light. So to be safe, I cut it in complete darkness, which was a challenge, but by taping down my paper cutter, I could place the film against some edges to get the right size. The film sits a bit loosely in the holders, which is not ideal. That can cause missed focus if it's not sitting on the correct focal plane, and also distortioning the image if different parts of the film are at different distances from the lens. The catalog lists some sheet film adapters for these holders, but the only adapters I could find on eBay were the wrong size and must be meant for a different camera. Still, I decided to just give it a try with the film directly in the glass plate holders. One of my favorite things about living in Oslo is the vast array of forest trails surrounding the city. I took the camera to Østmarka and set up for some shots on a tripod. As is typical the first time I try an old camera, I made a few errors. This shot is very washed out. The lens was pretty much in direct sunlight, and it had not been properly cleaned, which I only did after this session. And that can definitely contribute to the haze. The second shot is not much better, with completely missed focus. I'm not really sure what happened here. I think with the ISO 80 film, I wanted to keep the shutter speeds from becoming too long, and to do that I opened up the aperture a lot. And especially with the film not being completely flat at the focal plane, that seems to have been a bad idea. I think the film not being at the focal plane is supported by the fact that there is a strip all the way at the edge where the focus seems to be better. So I think the sheet of film was curling forward at the edges and being more in a correct position out there. This is the first usable shot. There was a forest fire here a few years ago, and I tried to photograph these burnt tree trunks. I also think you get a sense of depth here with the trees being at different distances from the camera. I also took this shot, which is completely unremarkable. I was trying to show the birch tree hiding in the bigger spruce, but it just didn't work the way I hoped. My second outing with the camera was to the better side of Norway, the west. On the way I stopped at Hauklifjell. This is the old road from around 1900. It is now blocked by rockfall, and this massive boulder has landed perfectly in the middle of the road. I thought it could make an interesting subject. On this trip I brought actual glass plates in addition to film. These are so-called dry plates, which are just regular glass panes coated in photographic emulsion. They're called dry plates in contrast to an earlier technique called wet plate photography. And the names are pretty much descriptive. The difficulty with wet plate photography is that the plates need to be coated, exposed, and developed within a very short time span. That effectively means that you need to set up some kind of darkroom on the location you're shooting at. Dry plates, on the other hand, are coated with a stable emulsion that dries out. You can therefore bring just the plates and the camera on location, bring them back home, and develop in bulk when you're done shooting. Because of the convenience of dry plates, they quickly replaced the wet plate process when they were invented. Today it seems like wet plate photography is more popular than dry plates. But there is a Slovenian company called Zebra Dry Plates that coats and sells them both in standard and custom sizes. I ordered a pack of 6 by 13 centimeter plates and loaded them in these individual holders, as they're too thick for the holders in the magazine. This way I could also load film in the magazine, so I had a backup in case I messed up exposing or developing the dry plates. A bit down the road there was an old tunnel. It was pitch black inside, so I kind of got the creeps and left in a hurry after taking this shot. I feel like having a clear foreground object that does not leave the frame on any side really helps with the 3D effect. In this image, the wide rock in the foreground plays that role. Just looking at one of the two images, it kind of blends in with the rest of the rubble. But when looking at it in 3D, it really pops out. This scene was really beautiful in person, but unfortunately I missed focus completely, so only the foreground is sharp. Again, I think the film not being at the correct plane played a part, because missing focus by this much is really bad even for me. While this was an accident, it kind of touches on a difference between regular photography and stereoscopic photography. With regular 2D photography, you might use a shallow depth of field to convey depth in your image. You separate your subject from the background by making the subject sharp and the background blurry. With stereoscopic photography, however, I find that a small aperture with a deep depth of field gives the best sense of depth. It allows the viewer to choose for themselves what they focus on in the image, and gives a more immersive and realistic feeling. And by the way, this is just my own opinion. I'm sure there are other resources out there on how to best do stereoscopic photography. The next day, I hiked into a gorge below the Vördingsås waterfall. This was a really serene location, and on a weekday I was completely alone. The glass plates I'm using have an ISO of around 2, so you need quite long exposures. In this case, I really liked how that turned out with these long white streaks in the river. The dimensions I specified when I ordered the glass plates were slightly too big, so I had to use a bit of force when inserting them into the holders. I ended up cracking one of the plates, but I decided to try to make a panorama with it anyway. There are a lot of old stereo views that have been scanned and put online. The US Library of Congress, for example, has a big collection. When I got back from my trip, I searched for the locations I'd been to, and found this image from 1905 at the latest, taken just across the river from where I was standing. I also stopped at what might have been the greenest river I have ever seen. Unfortunately, I only brought black and white film. I tried to capture some interesting rock formations and some movement in the water. I was definitely more happy with the shots at Vöringsfoss than these ones. Back home, I trade developed the glass plates since they can be handled under red safe light. I then scanned the images and used a free program called Stereophoto Maker to align the left and right images. I decided to send them off to be printed from the digital copies. I might include some darkroom printing in a future video, but I don't have a great setup for enlarging at the moment, and the stereo shots would have complicated the process quite a bit. I made sure the prints were the right size for my stereoscope, so now I finally have some new content to enjoy in my 125-year-old VR headset. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have suggestions on cameras I should check out in the future, please let me know in the comments.